My name is Jocelyn. I'm the chef and founder of a plant-based food business here in LA called Todo Verde. And I've been cooking a lot of recipes from my book that came out earlier this year called La Vida Verde. But you all have continued to request really awesome recipes that you wanted me to share. So I am now kind of making sure that I'm writing down all these different recipes of things that I have made, like a vegan rompope and things like that. Obviously, like this calabaza and piloncillo is already vegan, so there isn't too much adjustment there. But it's just forcing me to make sure I write everything down so that I can share these recipes with you all. So I am going to get into this recipe. We're going to start off with making the calabaza first because that needs some time in the oven. And I want to make sure that it has some time to cook before we move on to our rompope. And before we even get to that calabaza, I want to talk about a few different options. So when you go to the store and you see calabaza, the kind that we're talking about, because I know in Mexico, calabaza could be even like zucchini or Mexican squash, or calabaza is kind of like the overarching term for every single type of calabaza there is out there. But here I have a butternut squash. I also have like a Halloween calabaza, this is sort of like the traditional calabaza. And then I also have a sweet potato, which is obviously not calabaza, but alternatively, this still works really, really well. And I have used it in a pinch when I don't have a calabaza on hand, and sweet potato works really, really well in this recipe. In fact, I think it might be almost a little bit more my favorite than the calabaza itself. So up to you which option you want to use. About 2 to 3 pounds of each one of these would yield pretty well for like 4 or 5 people or so. And so I'm going to be using the Halloween calabaza because it's that time of the year. The leaves are getting crunchy, so let's go with it for this one. If you were to use the butternut squash, like one thing that I've seen is like folks peel the butternut squash because the skin is really tough, a lot tougher than the pumpkin. And you could do that, but just know that if you roast it or cook it really well, it does soften up. So you don't necessarily need to remove the peel. That's sort of like a personal preference. For the sweet potato, I have actually left the peel on as well, and I've cut this just in cylinders. So like cut the top and bottom off of each one of these options. And then I just cut them into cylinders, like maybe like 1/2 inch cylinders, and cook them that way. So it really depends on, whether you prefer the skin on or off. But I think that it's all edible, so why not eat it, right? Instead of making it trash. And if you have compost, well, then you can throw it in the compost. So the butternut squash is going to be a little bit more tough if you're cutting into this. And essentially you would do the same thing that I'm about to do here with this pumpkin is, obviously a pumpkin is like really wobbly and you can easily cut yourself if you don't find a firm edge here. So I have a sticker on this one, but it's okay because I'm going to cut that off. So this is a pumpkin pie pumpkin is what they call it. Because this is the type of pumpkin that you use to make a pie, and it'll get softer the more that you cook it. This butternut squash will still have a little bit of it'll hold its shape a little while longer than this squash will. So I'm just going to use my knife to carefully cut off the bottom here, carefully cut off the top. Oh my gosh. This is our workout for today. So this can get composted. And then if you were to peel your pumpkin, you just can use this. Now it's more of like a flat surface that feels a little bit more sturdy. So at this point, you can decide if you want to peel it, and you can use your knife here or even a smaller knife to just kind of peel carefully. And you can use a peeler or you can use a knife, whatever you have on hand. It'll take a little while to do that. I'm okay with leaving the peel on, so I'm just going to get right to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use my knife to cut all the way through. And it's going to take me a second here. Okay, so there we go. So now we have our calabaza cut in half. And you're gonna wanna grab a spoon and get all these pumpkin seeds out. You can toast these and use them for something else later. These are also edible. Let me grab a spoon. But we're not going to use it for this particular recipe right now. I do have pepitas that I've already toasted beforehand that will be a part of sort of the garnish at the end that'll give a little crunch. But I'm not going to be using these particular squash seeds right now. So you'll see all this stringiness. That's totally fine. I want to try to get a good amount of that out with my spoon. You can use an ice cream scoop. You can use just like a wooden spoon, I've heard works really well too, because it kind of has a little bit of grip on it. In fact, let me grab a wooden spoon. And so I just want to get as much of this out as possible, although it's not a big deal if I have some of the stringiness that gets left behind. All right. So there's that so far. I can also use my knife to just cut this off. And it didn't cut it off. It's okay. There we go. There we go. All right, so I have that piece. Let me get the other piece all de-seeded, and then I'll get rid of these seeds. I'm gonna just put them aside, and I'm gonna figure out whether I'll toast them later or what exactly I'll do. I've seen people just like with this skin and all like this residue, just throw them in the oven this way, or like toast them on a comal. You can wash them ahead of time, like so you can give them a little soak, get some of that off, and then throw them in the oven or on a comal to toast up a little bit. And these could be used in a sauce as a thickener that'll have like a really nice calabaza flavor, like that pepita flavor. It's really a versatile ingredient. It could be a snack, you know, like you can just eat these as a little snack. Okay, so I think I got all of my seeds out. Let me get rid of this pile here. All right, so I have quite a bit of seeds here actually. That would be a whole other class. I should have figured out what to do with these. Maybe you can also plant these right now and get a look at this seed that's already sprouted. So that is on its way to trying to become another pumpkin right there. I'm trying to think, maybe I should plant these and see if I can get some little baby pumpkins. So many so many ways to play with these. All this food is like definitely, you know, it's not trash. So figure out how you can use it again. Okay. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my calabaza into pieces that are, you know, sometimes I've seen like sort of triangular pieces. You can cut them into just, you know, into lengthwise slices. You can kind of take it any direction that you want. You could cut like triangle here, 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 you know. So I'll do a few different shapes and then we'll see which one ends up looking the coolest for this particular dish. So you can kind of play around with the different shapes and sizes. And so you just want to make sure you have a nice sharp knife. It's going to help you cut all the way through. That won't slide around too much. All right, so we have some nice kind of triangular looking pieces going there. We can do just slices. There we go. Let me do one more set here. Make sure your hands are definitely out of the way for this. All those fingers out of the way. And as I'm cutting these, I'm going to grab my baking dish and I'll just start lining them into a baking dish. And I like to do the skin side down so that it's like fully submerged in the piloncillo syrup that we're going to be creating. And then that way I know that it's super soft and cook through when we're done with this dish. And I've already, for anyone who is cooking along, I've already preheated my oven. Right now it's at 350 degrees. So that way it's ready to go when I am. It's been ready to go. It's like, girl, where are you? I've been ready, waiting for this moment. And I'm over here still struggling with the calabaza. But again, this is my morning workout, so it's all good. All right, just a few more pieces here. All right, there we go. Whew. So you can see that I got quite a few pieces. Let me get my cutting board out of the way and I can bring my baking dish forward. So I have quite a few pieces. You can account for somebody eating like 2 to 3 pieces or so per serving. It really depends on the person. And I have 6 ounces here of piloncillo. Piloncillo typically comes in this cone shape, and you can find it at most Mexican or pretty much all Mexican grocery stores, sometimes other stores as well too. And it's kind of hard, almost as hard as a rock. I say almost because with a little pressure, you can break this down. And so essentially what I did is I kept the piloncillo in the plastic film that it comes in, and I put a cutting board on my countertop, and you can cover this with a towel if you want, like a dish towel or something like that. And then I literally got my hammer and I just gently just tapped it. You don't have to go hard. I've seen people like put this in a bag and like bang it on cement. You could do that. Sometimes the bag will tear. But if you just keep like tapping it hard enough with a hammer and keep turning it, you're going to start to like break it up into pieces. And then once I feel like the bottom's pretty broken up, then I'll turn it and I'll start banging and tapping on the center and the top until essentially it stays in this and it's all broken up inside of this pouch. So that's the way I like to do it. People have different methods. I've seen people try to like shave this with like a grater. There's a lot of techniques. I'm okay with the big chunks because this is all gonna melt once it goes in the oven. Like this chunk is probably a little too big. I probably should have broken this one a little bit more. So all I'll do is I'll make sure it's like towards the bottom so that it gets, it's in the liquid and it's gonna melt a little bit faster. And so all I'm gonna do is I'm just going to spread this piloncillo pretty equally throughout the entire dish here of calabaza. So making sure that every calabaza has like a little bit of piloncillo on it. And this is really good. It's a unrefined raw cane sugar. Sugar is, I think has a bad reputation because it's been so refined and people identify sugar as white sugar. And white sugar is actually pretty bad for us because it doesn't have any nutrients. It's been stripped of all the nutrients and bleached and all these things so that it becomes white. And it works very well for pastries where people don't want any color profile in their sugar. But if you're using this raw cane sugar, I wouldn't say, eat it all the time, but it's definitely a lot better than eating this refined white powdered sugar. So the other thing that I'm going to add here is I have a cinnamon stick. Make sure that it's this flaky kind of cinnamon. This is a Ceylon cinnamon stick, so it means I can easily, break this and crack this with my hands, and it's super flaky. There's other types of cinnamon sticks out there that are not like this. They're hard they're really hard. You can't break them by hand. That's a different variety of cinnamon that I can't remember the name of right now. But I like to break this up slightly, not until they're like super tiny chunks, but just enough where I can kind of like tuck the cinnamon around in different areas. And I know that cinnamon flavor is really going to permeate throughout the dish. So again, that's going towards the bottom so that it can really brew in the in the liquid. And then the other thing that I have here is 3 cloves or clavos. You could use allspice berries. You can use, you know, star anise. You can really continue to add to this, but we're just going to keep it simple with the cinnamon and the cloves right now. But if you do have allspice berries and star anise, I do have it. I almost want to grab it and do it, but we can keep it simple right now. That's enough of the flavor profile that we need right now. And then I just had in here just a pinch of salt. So I'm just gonna sprinkle a little bit of salt on here just to kind of help balance out the flavors. And the last thing is we need a little bit of water. So even a cup or so of water is enough. You just want a little bit of water to essentially help to melt that piloncillo and start to create a little bit of a syrup. So I'm just going to add just a touch of water here. And in fact, the more water you add, the more that I find that this dish stays a little loose, which is okay, but you know, I prefer to be a little bit more syrupy, so I don't like to add too much water. And what I like to do is I like to start this off in the oven covered, so you can, you know, I can use some foil here to cover this calabaza. And then once I get to the point where my calabaza is like pretty fork tender, meaning like it's cooked, it's soft, then I uncover it and I really allow that syrup to continue to melt and kind of coat the calabaza. You could also move the pieces around. So if there's pieces that aren't coated at that point with the syrup, you can move them around so that they are. I'm just gonna give my hand a rinse. I'm gonna grab my foil. This is parchment paper. There's my foil. So I just have more parchment paper. Where is my foil? Here we go. All right, I have some recycled. Get some recycled foil in your home. Okay. And then I'm also one of those señoras who will likely wash this and try to use it again after I'm done with it. So, so I try not to just have something be like one life. Like, could I use it to bake something else one more time before I, you know, crumble it up and see if I can recycle it. Okay, so this is gonna go into my oven. It's already preheated at 350 degrees. I'm gonna leave it in there for 25, 30 minutes or so. I'll check it, and then I will, at that point, decide whether it's time for me to remove the foil. And the foil is tenting it, so it means that it's gonna kind of help it like steam a little bit. If I didn't have the foil on there, I'll start to see that the top pieces of the calabaza will start to brown and kind of dry out. And so I don't want that. So I'll steam it for the first majority of it cooking, and then I'll remove it and let it continue to kind of melt the syrup a little bit. And is the cáscara edible once baked? Yes, so we were talking about that earlier. So yes, the cáscara it'll soften up. Even for the butternut squash that has like a really tough skin, will be edible once cooked. So you don't have to remove the skin, only if you want to. I think the skin probably, like in most cases, the skin is sometimes more nutrient dense than the inside of the vegetable or plant itself. So I'm okay with leaving it on. So I'm gonna just pop this in my oven. I put it on the top rack of my oven because heat rises, so it's gonna be hotter at the top of my oven, and that'll hopefully help it cook a little faster so that we have enough time to get all this done before class is over. Okay, so let's move on to our rompope. Let me grab these ingredients. Let me get this out of the way. All right, so I have all our ingredients here for our rompope. And what I have here is, and then we can look at the other, yes, there we go. So I have a variety of different ingredients here. Rompope, as we know it, is an egg-based beverage that's mostly drank during the holiday season. Sometimes it's spiked with rum, which, by the way, I have to grab my rum right now too. I forgot to get that. And then that's optional, only if you want it to be spiked with rum. But essentially what I'm using here to replace the egg is I'm obviously going to use tofu, which was one of the ingredients. And in fact, one of my Todo Verde kitchen team members who loves rompope, when she first started working with me, she's like, I'm skeptical. Like, how is this going to taste like rompope? Its egg is the main star of this dish. And she tried it, this vegan version. She was like, OMG, wow. Like, she was really shocked by it. And so what you'll need is the tofu, which is going to be sort of like your thickener when you blend this. And that's really going to give you like that nice kind of like creamy texture. You'll need some nut-based milk. So it's 1 cup of tofu. And I haven't measured out my cup yet. I just have a little block of tofu here. So I'll grab my cup measure and I'll break it up and fit it into the cup measuring or into the cup measure. I have 2 cups of, this is oat milk and almond milk. You can use just oat milk, just almond milk, soy milk, whatever you have on hand. I prefer that you use something that's unsweetened and unflavored. But if you happen to have one that's already flavored or sweetened, then be mindful of the other things that you're adding in there. So, you know, I'm adding sugar to mine, but if yours is already sweetened, then add much less sugar and then adjust it if you need to. If yours is already vanilla flavored, don't add the vanilla and only add it if you need to. So, so just kind of go based off of where you are. So I have my 1 cup tofu. I started off with a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric, and turmeric here is really just a coloring. So this turmeric is gonna give my my rompope that yellow golden color that a rompope has, but I don't want it to taste like turmeric. So there's a very fine line of how much turmeric you use. So I'm starting off with a 1/4 teaspoon. You can go up to 1/2 teaspoon. And really it depends on like the type of turmeric that you have, because my really good friend, she owns a company called Diaspora Co, and she specializes in importing spices from India, like single origin, organic, like very delicious spices. And her turmeric is so potent. It's so extremely potent. So you can taste it. The color is more vibrant than the turmeric that you see sold at most grocery stores. Because this turmeric, like, I think this one may be from, this one is not Diaspora Co, but like a lot of the spices that we buy at stores have been sitting around for a long time. Like sometimes I've heard her say that some spices even at Whole Foods are over 6 years old. Which is so crazy. I know, I saw Saida's face like, what? And so she's directly importing, like they'll have their harvest season and you're eating turmeric that was literally harvested like just a couple months before. So it's like as fresh as you can get it pretty much here in the US. So look her up, Diaspora Co, her name's Sana. And so you just need a little bit of turmeric. This is a 1/4 teaspoon. And then I'm also using, I didn't have ground Ceylon cinnamon on hand. I have the other cinnamon, which I should look, let me look to see if it says the name of it on it. No, it doesn't. It just says powdered cinnamon. But there is that variety of cinnamon that is more of like the apple pie flavor. It's still good cinnamon, but it's not the Mexican cinnamon that we typically use. It's like flaky. But this is all I had that was ground. I literally just gave my bag of cinnamon away to somebody. And I was like, why did I do that? And so I'm just using this for now. It'll still taste good. It's just gonna be a slight difference of the flavor profile. And then another key ingredient here, you'll see this little pinch here of, this is black salt, even though it looks pink. And let me show you what this looks like. So I'm using here this black salt, Kala Namak. And so this you can find at a lot of Indian markets. You can find it online. And it's a black salt, although you can see that it does not look black, but it has been ground. But the main reason I'm using this is if you smell this, it has a very strong smell of sulfur, of egg. It smells like egg. And so this is gonna help give me that egg flavor in the rompope. But again, a little bit of this goes a long way. So I'm just starting off with like a dash, which is like 1/8 of a teaspoon, just a little bit. And then if I want more of that flavor, I'll add more to it. But I'm just starting off with a little bit. And then here's another star. I'm like, every ingredient here is a star, but this one is really truly the star, which is, you know, it looks kind of like a, you know, a little pebble on the ground. It's a nutmeg. So we usually see nutmeg ground, and the ground version is good too. The ground nutmeg tastes good, but nothing can replace a fresh whole nutmeg. I've mentioned a few times that I'm in the process of launching a few ice cream flavors with some friends that own an ice cream company. And we compared side by side because they really wanted to use their ground nutmeg that they already had on hand. And I was like, trust me, the freshly ground nutmeg is going to be so much tastier. And doing side by side comparisons really proved that this is going to really make the flavor taste so much better. So I'm only going to use like about 1/4 of this, and I'll shave it down, and I'll show you how I shave it down in just a few minutes. The other thing I have here is 1/4 cup of just raw turbinado sugar. So again, this like very low processed sugar. You can see that it's like big crystals or granules. And so it hasn't been ground to like a white sugar stripped of its color. And so this is just like a very nice natural sugar. And I'm also using 1/4 cup, and I won't move that because I'll probably spill it, but it's 1/4 cup of just pure maple syrup. So that's just going to give it this like nice sweet note that maple syrup provides. It feels so smooth, but I didn't want it to be all maple syrup because maple syrup has also a very strong flavor. And so once you add too much maple syrup, then you end up having something that tastes like a maple syrup drink. So you want to add just enough to kind of balance it. And I also have some vanilla here. I'm using Molino or Molina vanilla blend. And I'm going to be using here about a 1/2 tablespoon of this vanilla extract. So I'm going to get right into it. Let me grab my blender. Everything's going to be going into a blender. So I'll be kind of pouring into there. So I'll start off with measuring my 1 cup of tofu, and it's probably going to be about 1/2 of, or maybe a little bit more than 1/2. And essentially what I do when I measure out the tofu is you just kind of break it up and try to fill up all the gaps in here. You could also weigh this, like once you do this one time and you are like, okay, 1 cup is about, you know, this many grams, like, you know, 30 grams or whatever, then you could just weigh the grams and you'll know how much that weighs. So this for me is okay because I have to kind of like push it down to make it fit. I can probably just put another piece in there. It's not super precise, I will say, but this is just kind of the way I function. So it's about 1 cup of tofu, and that is going to get dropped right into our blender. I'm using a Vitamix blender because it just blends everything so smooth. It just makes our life so much easier. I'm going to grab a towel. All right, and then I'm going to add all the spices. I have, again, 1/4 cup of that raw sugar. I have 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. I have a 1/2 teaspoon of, actually 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, a pinch of that black salt, and that's all going to go in. Let me get all of that out with the spatula. This bowl was wet, so some of that sugar is stuck. There we go. And you can taste that, or you can smell that black salt, definitely. It's definitely like a kind of pungent flavor. So again, a little bit goes a long way. I have 1/4 cup of my maple syrup that's going in. Let me get all of that out with the spatula. Maple syrup is not a cheap ingredient, so you want to always scrape your bowl. Make sure you get every little last drop of that out. And you also want to make sure that you're using pure maple syrup. I'm a big stickler for that. I know sometimes not everybody uses that. Like you might use some other sugar syrup that's flavored with maple syrup. That's fine sometimes, but at home, I mean, even with todo verde, like we just use maple syrup, and that's why our stuff is like not cheap, but I just find that the flavor is so much better. And let me get my vanilla in here. Ooh, this got really hot because I had the oven on. I'm gonna do a half tablespoon. So I'm gonna grab my measuring spoons and I'm gonna eyeball half of a tablespoon. If you're using a vanilla extract, you may need to use a little bit less, like a half tablespoon might be kind of a lot to use. This one is a blend, so the alcohol content is not super strong. And so I can use a little bit more of it. I can get away with more without it feeling overpowering. And then I'm gonna add my 2 cups of my milk. And lastly, I'm going to use a microplane or a grater. If you're using a grater, you want to use the side that has the smallest, you know, serrated size. And you're just going to grab your, and you could do this in a bowl separately if you wanted to, because I have dropped this by accident and it might fall in there. You can just grab it and rinse it. It's not a big deal. But you want to just be careful with your fingers. Don't grate your knuckles. And I'm just essentially grating just little fine pieces. So I get about 1/4 of the way through this nutmeg. It smells so good. This is really what makes rompope, the nutmeg. I mean, even if you forgot the cinnamon and all these things, the nutmeg would so shine through. So I'm going to leave this at this point and I'm going to blend it and see how it turns out, how it tastes. Let me blend this up. So essentially what you're looking out for here is a couple of things. You're wanting to make sure that you blend all the bits of tofu so that it's smooth. If you have a blender that doesn't blend super smooth, you can always pass your rompope through a strainer just to catch any large bits of it, you know, similar to like if you were making a smooth sauce, you can always do that to catch like pieces of chile and things like that. I'm gonna give mine a little taste. I could already see that the color isn't almost, it's like, the yellow isn't as vibrant as I want. And I started off with just a 1/4 teaspoon. So I'll go ahead and add the other 1/4 teaspoon to get to my 1/2 teaspoon. The flavor is nice and sweet. I can taste the nutmeg. It like pierces through, but it's not overpowering. And I can also taste for me, the cinnamon, because I know it's the wrong cinnamon. I'm just like, oh, I used the wrong cinnamon, but it still tastes good. And then for me, it has enough sweetness. It feels like pretty well balanced. I prefer things to not be overly sweet. So if you make this and you find, oh, I want it to be a little bit sweeter, you can add a little bit more of the maple syrup or a little bit more of the sugar. But I think that this is just fine. So I'm just gonna grab a little bit more of my turmeric and give it another blend. And this should be good to go. You wanna pop it in your fridge so that it has time to chill if you like to have yours cold. And the other thing that you can add is definitely some rum to spike it. So for this quantity of rompope, if you want it to be just lightly spiked, you know, because this is going to serve a few people. You can probably start with like 3/4 of a cup to a cup of rum. And then if you want it to feel even stronger, you can add more. Let me give this another blend. So let's see here. And this, I was just using the, there's doing construction across the street. So sorry if you hear some random sounds. I was just using the Trader Joe's turmeric. So, which is why my, I think it wasn't as strong and potent as my diasporico that we use at the kitchen. I should bring that home. I'm just gonna pour in here so you can see that color. So for me, I feel like it could even be a little bit more golden, but this definitely has a little bit of that like yolky yellow color that a Rompope has. You can see the little bits of nutmeg in there. It's nice and smooth. If you find that you want it to be a little bit thicker, because it's going to be a sauce for our dish here, what you could do is just add a little bit more tofu, a little bit more of the sweetener if you want. This is like perfect for drinking right here, you know. I'm gonna leave actually a little bit more in the blender, and I'm gonna add just a bit more of my tofu just to thicken it just a little bit more so it'll sit really nicely on my dish. So I'll probably just add just another couple pieces here of my tofu. This was a total of 10 ounces of tofu, and I only needed a cup, which is about 8 ounces. All right, so I'll just add that.
Chef, question for you.
Yeah, of course.
About the tofu, I don't know a ton about tofu, but I know that there are varieties, or some is soft and some is what's your preference or recommendation?
That's a very great question because I didn't touch on that. So yes, you can definitely find everything from like silken tofu, which is a really, really soft tofu that like just kind of, you can put it, a lot of people put it in smoothies or in drinks. It's almost like custardy. And then there's firm tofu, and then there's extra firm tofu. So this tofu, as you can see, is extra firm. Like it's not really jiggly. You know, I have to really like break it apart. This is the tofu that I typically have on hand at home. I rarely have silken tofu on hand at home. And the reason for me is because I find that this extra firm is more versatile. Like I could use this extra firm, like I'm using it here in this recipe, and it's very neutral in flavor, so it like lends really well. You can easily mask the tofu flavor with, you know, these ingredients like a strong nutmeg, a strong cinnamon, the sugar. But then the other reason is because I like to make like tofu scrambles and things like that, like breakfasty type things. And you can't do that with the silken tofu. Silken tofu is like mostly meant to just like blend or be custardy. And so I just buy all the time extra firm tofu. So if you eat a lot of tofu, like I find that I don't eat a whole lot of tofu. Like it's probably something that we eat like once a week or every other week or something like that. But if I ate it as a regular staple all the time, then I would probably have like the different varieties for different things. But yeah, that. I guess that kind of depends on like what people like to use their tofu for. So hopefully that kind of answered a little bit. I've also seen people like make tofu at their home from scratch, which is so cool. It's essentially, you know, soybeans that you can ferment for a little bit. So you like blend them until smooth with typically just water, pass them through like a fine strainer, and let that thing just ferment for a while. And so it won't be as solidified as like an extra firm or anything like that. But it will definitely hold a little bit of a shape. Just gonna add a little pinch more, about like a teaspoon more of sugar to this mixture, and then let me blend it up until it's smooth, and this should be good to go for our serving. Another thing that you can also add to this mixture to thicken it, which we used in our class last night, is agar-agar if you heated it up. So, but you would need just a touch of agar-agar to slightly thicken it, not enough to gel it into a gelatina or anything like that. But you could also use something like that. You know, you could use everything. So this, I could still see little pieces of tofu here. So for me, that's not done yet. I probably need to add a little bit more liquid to this to kind of help it move along. I'm just giving it a taste. That tastes really good. Tastes really good. I'm going to add just a touch more of my liquid in here to kind of help it blend because I have such a big blender and it needs a little bit of help to blend things up. You can see that this rompope here, it's going to thicken up a little bit because it does have that tofu in there that's going to kind of soak in some of those flavors. So similarly, when people like squeeze tofu and then they marinate it in some sauce like for a few hours because it kind of soaks it up, it's doing that right now. So it's going to continue to kind of thicken up our rompope slightly. All right. So I think I have the consistency here that I'm looking for, which is nice and smooth. And you can see that it's a little bit thicker and that it coats the spoon a little bit more. And so that's good for our dessert here because you could use this rompope that's a little bit runnier, but maybe add it into a little bowl so that you don't kind of spill over as easily. Either option will work just fine because you're still going to definitely get that like nutmeg, nicely seasoned rompope flavor that'll kind of hit you as you take a spoonful of the calabaza. So at this point, our calabaza has been in there for maybe about like 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to take a look at it, see if I want to turn some pieces. So I'm going to clear this space a little bit and make room for that calabaza. Any questions so far?
Can I ask if what's the difference between turbinado sugar and piloncillo?
Sure. I mean, piloncillo is really like a completely unprocessed, or I mean, there is some process, right? Like you have to break down the caña. Like caña is like unprocessed sugar, but it's like the least processed of all sugars that you can probably find out there in the market. And the raw turbinado sugar has been processed to a certain extent in that it's like granulated sugar. So it has gone, I can't tell you exactly what the process is of like how they get it to be that way. But I just find that I prefer raw turbinado even over brown sugar, really. Brown sugar might be like um, a little bit more similar to some of the piloncillo. And there's a few different varieties of piloncillo. Like in El Salvador, I think they call it panela. Also in South America, it's panela. And panela is sometimes a little bit more fluffy and crumbly than a piloncillo. So they're all slightly different. I wonder if, and this I don't know a whole lot about, but I almost wonder if there's like a couple different varieties of sugar cane, or if they're all the same and it's just the process of how they make it into this like cone shape that's slightly different. Um, I'm not 100% sure, but obviously like from this point, then people get it into this like very like, you know, specific granule shape that doesn't stick to each other, like it doesn't clump. So it's gone through some sort of process to help it get there. But I prefer still like as raw as I can find it, even in the crystallized form, rather than using a white sugar. You could also use syrups like agave is one that has been popularized throughout the last few years, although agave, I would say, is not great on a regular basis. It got a huge like positive push not too long ago because people were saying, oh, like people who have diabetes, like when you have agave, it doesn't really trigger your glucose. And so, oh, great, like you can have agave without it, like without you feeling that like the all the sugar, I guess the sugar rush, I should say. But the thing is, it's really low in glucose, but really high in fructose, higher than high fructose corn syrup, which a lot of people don't really talk about too
Yeah,
much. And
that's super
so,
shocking.
yeah. And so, fructose can only be processed through your liver. So it's fine if you have it now and then, but if you have it as an everyday sweetener, you may be kind of harming your liver and your digestive system in that process because it's something that's hard for your body to digest. So just look out for articles about it. I've
Yeah,
read articles back in the day about it.
that's helpful. Thanks. And I was asking because my dad loves sweets. Like he closes out his night with a camote con azúcar y leche or cereal, and I'm trying to introduce alternatives that are still yummy. And so I wondered if agave was like an alternative to piloncillo, but it seems to me that piloncillo is kind of your best bet.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
mean, there's others out there too, which I haven't done too much research into, but like stevia is one where it's supposed to be like a nice alternative for folks who also are diabetic. I mean, I think that the main thing, and I don't think you said that your dad's diabetic, but I know my dad is diabetic. I just assumed. Um, but I know that for folks, just in general, let's just not say that they have diabetes or not in our communities. When you have something that maybe doesn't trigger your body to really have that sugar intake, but it fools your brain into thinking that you're having sweet, at the end of the day, you're still creating habits that will crave sweet, you know? That will crave like that pinch of like that over the top sweetness. My partner has a big sweet tooth, and I have been trying to encourage him to have something that's like half sweet, you know, like have it half sweet, and it might still taste pretty sweet, but after you have that half sweet version so many times consistently, at some point your palate will be trained to feel like, oh, that half sweet version is actually all I need of sweetness. So we have to kind of retrain our mind and our palate. And I like to think about it as like when, as if we were little babies, right? And when we were little babies, it was very unlikely that we, you know, our parents were giving us a little bit of Coca-Cola, a little bit of piloncillo this, a little bit of that. It was like super neutral. In fact, it was probably just like steamed calabaza blended with milk and no sugar added. So really trying to come back to the essence of like what our palate was then, and like why were they giving us such unprocessed food? Because they knew that it was good for us and that our stomachs couldn't digest all the other junk. So it's kind of trying to come back to that in a certain way. So we have to retrain our palate. And like I can go on and on about this. Like I in my talks sometimes talk about our tongue. and how it's this like little 2-3 inch muscle in our body that controls everything else that happens in our body. You crave something and you want it on your tongue, and then it you know, if you want the sweet, if you want the fat, if you want the fried, if you want whatever to hit that tongue, it's going to affect your whole digestive system and your whole process of well-being. So you have to kind of figure out how to retrain that muscle like any other muscle on your body, you know?
Thanks for sharing. It's super just
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I can geek out on this all day, but we only have till what time do we have? We have 20 minutes left in our class. Okay. So I am going to carefully pull out my calabaza when I forgot to lay down this towel so I don't mess up my counter here. All right. It smells so good. Hopefully it's had a little bit of time to do some magic here. All right. So I am going to do our little reveal here. All right, so what I'm going to look for right now, so I still need my piloncillo to melt a little bit more. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all these chunks that are on top into my liquid just to make sure that they have more time. And they're soft now, actually. You can see that I can grab a piece of this piloncillo and I could just with the tongs like start to kind of break it down a little bit. Turn that over. Make sure that all of it's sitting in some liquid. I can smell the cinnamon. I can smell the clove. I want all of that to sit in that syrup so that it gets super potent and flavorful. And then the other thing that I'm checking for is I'm going to grab a fork. I'm checking for that fork tenderness. So fork tender, so this is still hard, right? So fork tender, it's actually not that hard. It's almost there. Fork tender is this, like you can pull the fork out of, so you can poke all the way through and you can pull out. This side is still not fork tender. Like I can pierce it, but I'm lifting up the whole calabaza. So it still needs a little bit of time. I'm gonna actually leave it uncovered for the remainder of the time just because I wanna make sure that we get this all nice and melty and syrupy before our class is over. If we were not in a class and I had more time, I'd probably leave this covered for about another 10 minutes or so and then uncover it after that. But I will go ahead and pop this in now. And the other thing that you can do at this point, you know, is you can check to see like, do I want to flip over, you know, my my pieces of calabaza so that the top of it is now in the syrup. So you can see what you want to do with these pieces depending on how cooked through they are. And I'm going to pop this in the oven and talk about a few alternatives, but I want to make sure that I have some time for it to pop in the oven. So again, putting it on the top rack, being very careful here to not burn myself. There we go. And I will let that cook up until right before our class ends. And so the other alternative that I was mentioning is that you could cook this on your stovetop if you wanted to. I've seen that done where you might have a pot, and in that pot, it would be the same things. You can put water, piloncillo, cloves, star anise, allspice berries. You can add slices of orange, like whatever the flavors are that you want out of that dish. And once you dilute that piloncillo, once it's all melted, you can add your pieces of calabaza into that pot and let it cook for 20, 30 minutes or so until it's cooked all the way through and it really absorbs that flavor. The only thing with that I have found is that unless you cook it for a much longer period of time, that it doesn't really get syrupy. It kind of just stays watery. And so like, that's not the way that I really enjoy to cook it. It feels like there is a lot of water involved. And you also have to use a whole lot more piloncillo because you have to coat the whole calabaza. So your pot is going to be maybe like 2 cones of piloncillo plus a whole lot more water so that it's like submerged in the liquid. Whereas here in the oven, obviously the heat source is not just coming from the bottom and boiling, it's coming from every direction in the oven. So I just prefer to oven roast with piloncillo rather than to cook it on a stovetop. But if you were in a pinch and you wanted to make this faster, you could try that, and then just kind of see which way you prefer to cook it for the future. But I have made it in the oven for a long, long time. And it's just the way that I prefer. And like the longer that you leave it in there and you really allow the syrup to develop and to thicken, like the better it is. And in fact, this dish is going to taste better tomorrow. So I'm making it today, but really like I should be eating it tomorrow. It's going to be so much better tomorrow. So the flavors will have more time to like really integrate into each other. Is there anybody who's cooking along right now? I think let me see if I can see gallery view here. Okay, cool. So Maya and Mamita are cooking along. How are things looking?
Graham and Emma also gave a thumbs up too.
Oh, they did. Okay, great. Great. So yeah. All right. So it seems like it's going good. Yeah, it's going to need more time though. Definitely. So yeah. So you could also try once you feel like your calabaza has gotten to a point where maybe it's like 3/4 of the way cooked at the 350 temperature, you could turn the temperature up to like 400 or 450 and like really get it hot so that it like just melts that piloncillo and like gets the syrup going a whole lot faster. You can try that method as well too. I wouldn't cook it at the 450 from the beginning because like unless you have like thinner slices of calabaza, like you really want to make sure that you cook it all the way through, and that's going to take a little bit more time. And my bad, because I totally should have cooked one of these before class, so I could have been like, and here's the final version, you know, like out of the oven. But I didn't get a chance to do that. I had there was an LA Times photographer here right before class, and she was literally here all the way up until right before class. So I was like, oh, okay, can you go now? Because I need to finish preparing for class. So hopefully, yeah, little burst of like, yeah, it's gonna, there'll be an article out next month. Cool. All right, any other questions right now? And it could be as we're waiting about anything else, ingredient related, other classes that you'd like to see, or other recipes or anything like that.
You know what? Yesterday you mentioned the jericaya, and that's something that I grew up with. So I'm wondering if, like in the future, if maybe you can have a class. I know that takes a little longer, but that would be a good recipe too.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, jericaya, I would really have to test that. I haven't played enough with that just egg version. But I wonder if it's possible to get it to that point of becoming a jericaya, or if I could find another way to make it with like tofu, agar, the black salt, and then the sugar on top. It's like a whole process, and the jericaya has like a perfect caramelization on top too, that it's like it has to be like all right. you know
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, but that would be one that would be like a challenge that I think I'm down to accept, that sounds like a fun one to experiment with.
You talk about cinnamon, and you use cinnamon sticks, but cinnamon powder, is that when you put it in the oven, is that going to mix in too much? I know sometimes I've made hot chocolate and just like put cinnamon powder and it's super bitter, and sometimes it doesn't even like mix in thoroughly.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you were using cinnamon powder, I would use, so typically in the kitchen with Todo Verde, we equate a whole stick of cinnamon to about 1 tablespoon of cinnamon powder. But it also depends on like what the recipe is and how you're using it. because a cinnamon stick will like infuse a nice balancing flavor, like a té de canela in there, right? But when you add the cinnamon powder, it's everywhere. You know, you can't pull it out afterwards. It's like completely infused. So you could start off with like a teaspoon if you feel like, especially if your cinnamon's like pretty fresh and fragrant and really strong, you could do something like that. Alternatively, another thing that you can do is if you have a spice grinder or a Vitamix, what we have also done in the kitchen is like, we'll throw in our Vitamix, like, you know, 5 cinnamon sticks that we just break up, and then we blend it until we get cinnamon powder. And so you could make your own cinnamon powder. And I think that that Ceylon flaky cinnamon, if you're using it for Mexican recipes, is, I think the flavor is so much better than the other variety, which I wonder what the other variety is. I don't know if Sarah, you might know the other variety of cinnamon and what it's called. I always space on, I think it's also a name with a C. And they both come from like Indonesia and like Vietnam. Cinnamon is actually not an ingredient that's native to Mexico. So it's actually one where it has transformed our cuisine and the way that we eat. But like, think of mole with like no cinnamon, and atole with no cinnamon, and like all these sweets with no cinnamon. That was how we probably ate before, if we ever had cinnamon. So like, we have some things that are like not native to us that have transformed our food. But going back to your question, I would, yeah, with ground cinnamon, I would use a little bit less. Like right now, maybe I would have sprinkled on like anywhere between like a teaspoon to a tablespoon or something like that, which, by the way, 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So it's like 1, 2, or 3 teaspoons essentially. Start somewhere there, and then you can kind of see how much I love that Ceylon cinnamon. I love it so much. Like, I could have té de canela, like it's something that I inherently love. So for me, a tablespoon seems fine. But if you have folks that are not as huge of a fan of cinnamon like I am, then you want to start off a little bit less. All right, anybody else have any other questions? Any luck finding the cinnamon variety, Sarah? I was like, I wonder if she's gonna look it up.
I think there's cassia. Was that what you were
That's the
thinking?
one,
Mhm.
cassia. So cassia and Ceylon are the 2 most popular varieties of cinnamon. They might be the only 2 actually, cassia. And so cassia, if you find the stick, like, and sometimes you could also find that type of cinnamon at the Mexican grocery store, like in the El Guapo pouches or something like that. You can see that that stick is like solid. You cannot break it with your bare hands. You'd have to like get a hammer or something to break that cinnamon stick, because it's not flaky. It's like really rock solid. And so that is more of like that apple pie flavor profile. And I do bake, so I do use that type of cinnamon. And I think that the bag that I have is probably because I bought it by accident, to be honest with you, because I've only ever had Mexican cinnamon, like the Ceylon variety, at home for many years. But yeah, they definitely have a flavor difference. I want to explain what might be like the comparison of flavor difference, but I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but you can definitely taste it. All right, I'm crossing my fingers that the little calabaza is doing what it needs to do in the oven over here. Let's see. I'm gonna just turn up the heat a little bit for this last little bit. How do I do that? This is also a new stove. Oh, I see how I do it here. I just moved here, so I'm like trying to figure out how everything works. There we go. Okay. All right. And there was something else that I wanted to speak on too. We talked about the nutmeg. The other thing, if you have pepitas that you're using to garnish, and you're cooking along and your pepitas are still raw, mine are already toasted, because I like to toast in batches. So I'll toast some pepitas And then just let them cool down and leave them in the fridge in like a container so that I can pull them out easily for sauces or salads or to, you know, just garnish things like we're going to do today. But if I didn't have that on hand, then, you know, you can definitely put them in a dry skillet. So make sure that there's no oil, or a dry roasting pan where you're going to pop them in the oven. And then you want to just toast them until they get just slightly brown. The green will transform from like a more vibrant green to a more like brownish green. And then the pepitas will also puff up slightly. So they're going to go from like pretty flat seeds to ones that are puffed up enough, and you'll start to see that difference as you cook them. And so here I have some toasted ones. You can see here that, you know, the one I have in my hand is like really like a little ball that's puffed up, that's slightly brown. I like to toast them so that they still have that green hue to them, but you can keep toasting them until they start to get like this one that just fell. It's a little bit more on the brown side. And so you can do this in the oven. You just want to keep an eye on it and make sure that you're kind of shaking them up as needed, or just churning them as needed. And then for these can be used for, like I said, like you can make a pipián, which would be like pepitas with either toasted or pan fried chile guajillo and some tomato and onion and garlic. You could also use them for a really easy salad dressing of these toasted pepitas with some cilantro, some olive oil, and so it's mostly like a cilantro pepita flavored dressing that's super, super good. So you can really use these in a variety of different things. Like I like to just top these on everything from like oats that I eat in the morning to yogurt to salads to, you know, anything. They can go in any direction. These are just dry pepitas. You could also candy them, and I have done that before. I like the balance of like the uncandied pepitas with the sweet rompope and the already sweet calabaza. So I feel like if you love sweets, then you could do like my oven just raised its temperature. So if you love sweets, you could do like sweet on sweet on sweet. But essentially what you do is like you toast the pepitas in the dry pan. And then once they're getting kind of toasted, then you would put in a little bit of, you could put them in a pan if you wanted to, with a sprinkle of sugar, or you could, in the same saute pan that you toasted them, could add a little bit of sugar and like a touch of water if you wanted to like help break that down. But usually the sugar itself will melt. It'll like kind of caramelize with the heat. And so you just toss those and until it's completely melted. And then you can just spread these out on a sheet so that they can cool down, and you'll have some lightly candied pepitas, which would be really good as a garnish here too. All right, so I'm going to turn on this light and take a look at how, actually, I don't think this has a light. Let's see here. All right, so I'm gonna give these just another couple minutes, and then we'll plate right at 11:45, if that's okay. So any other questions in these next couple minutes as we wait for our calabaza to cook? Usually there's so many questions.
I'm talking a lot, but I do have a question about the differences in ovens. Like I have read before, and I've experienced it where I'm baking a pizza and it says 375 and for 15 minutes, and then mine will take 20 minutes or 25 minutes. So I don't know if you can share something about that. Like, are there differences in ovens and the way they heat up? And is 375 in my oven really 400 in yours, or, you know, any adjustments that you recommend we make when we're baking?
Totally. That is a really, really awesome question. Yes, it is possible that your oven is not at the correct temperature that it says it's at. And the only way to really know is to get an oven thermometer. So it's usually a little thermometer that you can hang inside of your oven. And then you can see what the true temperature is. You want to hang it towards like the door so you can see what the temperature is. But yes, in fact, at our kitchen, our commercial kitchen for Todo Verde, you know, we would roast things, not a ton of things, but we did roast things for Todo Verde. And we weren't super finicky about the temperature because we would, you know, kind of eyeball like, okay, let's let it roast in the oven for 20, 25 minutes. And then you take it out, you look at it and you're like, 2 more minutes, 5 more minutes or whatever. So for us, it wasn't a big deal, but there were bakers who would bake their stuff there. And they were like, you know, or people who would make macaroons and they're like, these ovens, like they're not at the right temperature. And so they would use the little thermometer hanging inside the oven to see, because they know that their temperature has to be precise, like exactly, you know, 375 for however many minutes. And then also one thing that's really important when you're baking too is a lot of people get kind of anxious. Like right now I got a little anxious and I was like, I don't think my oven has a light unless I open the door. So I had to open the door to like look to see how it's coming along. And that's something you don't want to do, because every time you open that door, you're releasing some of the heat and it cools it down by a few degrees, especially if you open the whole door and like check, you know, think about like, you know, Thanksgiving or the holidays and like people are baking several things in the same oven and they're like opening and closing the oven. And that really causes things to not cook properly. You really want to just have it closed. And if it's possible for you to say like, I'm going to cook one thing at a time, you know, so I'm only going to cook my such and such, you know, my potato dish for this many minutes. And then once that's done, then I can move on to the next thing that needs to bake in the oven versus like trying to cook several things at once, because it just really throws off the temperature. So yes, all that to say that all those things affect your cooking time. So you have to have a little bit of like just know-how in the kitchen. So when some people you know, have consumer packaged goods, like you're saying, like the pizza, like I just made something the other day that my friend Matthew Kenny, he started doing like vegan frozen things. So they were crab cakes, and it said if I wanted to cook them on my stovetop that they had to be thawed. And I was like, come on, dude, I know that from frozen it could get cooked, like no big deal, you know. So you kind of just have to know how food works and how you cook it and like how it's supposed to look and know how to adjust the temperature and things like that. And that is just like after like more time in the kitchen, you just kind of get the hang of how things are supposed to go and the flow. And you will also know like, oh, my oven is below temperature. Like this says 15 minutes, but it's going to take me 20. I just know already. So you kind of get the hang of it. This oven is new to me. This is literally I think the first time that I'm using this oven. So I don't know if this is taking longer because my oven is not at temperature. I don't know. So thanks for bearing with me, everyone, as I try to figure this all out. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull it out because we're past our class time. And I'm gonna show you how I would plate this dish so you can see the finished thing. And I am going to make a little bit of space here so I can place my oven dish here. All right, so I'm going to place my oven dish here.
We lost your phone feed.
Oh, I'm getting a phone call. Let me decline it. Okay, there you go. I should put that on airplane mode when I'm in class. All right, so I'm going to open this up. It's getting super bubbly now. I'll end up popping this back in the oven after our class, but I just want to show you how I would plate this. And I want to be extra careful because this is really hot. I have this up at 400 degrees now. Okay, so you can probably see that I have my calabaza here. I'm starting to see a little bit of like browning and blackening happening. When I put it back in, I'm gonna do skin side up and really let the the top of the calabaza gets some time in the syrup, so it gets a little even sweeter, and so that it also doesn't dry out too. And then I'm going to see here from the ones I had already flipped previously, which ones of those I'm going to plate right now. Ooh. This looks and smells so good. These are definitely nice and tender now. In fact, yeah, they're nice and tender. Okay, so I'm going to grab a plate. And the plating is really simple. I mean, I have my plate here, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my rompope, and I just want to coat the bottom. Ooh, this got really thick actually, which I'm totally fine with. But it's like a nice thick sauce. So this thickened up even more. And I'm just going to spread this around. And then I'm going to grab some of my calabaza here, nice and gently. I have a clove there, let me remove that. So I'll put that at the center of my dish. And just remove this piece of canela. And the more that you cook this, it's going to become even more caramelized and delicious. I want to use a little bit of my toasted pepitas. And then the last thing I'll do is a little bit of nutmeg. You just want to grate just a tiny bit more of that nutmeg over the top. Not a lot, just enough so that you can see those little pieces. And then if you had, I forgot to bring marigolds from my garden, but if you had some flowers or something that you wanted to use to garnish this, I would only use like a few petals of the flower versus the whole flower to garnish this. But here is the final dish. What do you all think? And it's only going to get better the more time I leave this in the oven. Let me give this a little taste here. So you can see that it's already soft and tender. I'm going to get a little bit that has the rompope on it, as well as that soft calabaza. I want to make sure this doesn't burn because it's 400 degrees hot right now. So we have that nice flavor of the rompope that like really elevates it. And then once this syrup is more syrupy, after a little bit more time in the oven, you can also drizzle a little bit of that over the calabaza too, so it gets even sweeter. And the little bit of crunch from the pepitas is really good. It just comes together really nicely. So any questions as we wrap up our class here?
I have a question. I noticed you used the rompope that you had in the blender, not the one that you had put away to chill. Does it matter?
This one I thickened up a little bit more with the extra tofu. And to be honest, I think it's a little bit too thick. Let me check the consistency of the other one. I think that I could have gotten away with this first round of rompope. It has a nice amount of thickness. I'll pour some out in a spoon so you can see. But it has a nice amount of thickness, not as thick as the one that I poured in that got a little thicker, but I think that this is totally fine. So I don't think that I really needed to thicken it even more than I did. And it feels a little bit smoother too. So yeah, you can totally use that one round that you make, and it should be fine for this dish. Any other questions? And I am eating the skin of the calabaza and it's totally fine. So it has softened up. It's easier to eat. The more time in the oven is going to allow it to continue to soften. Great.
Thank you so much, Chef.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. I hope that you're able to share this with your friends or family during the holiday season. If you have any questions, you can test this again with like, even right now, if you had enough space, you could have done a little bit of butternut squash, a little bit of calabaza, a little bit of sweet potato, and you can taste to see like which one you prefer. I still think this is good, but the sweet potato is always going to be my favorite. There's something really like grounding about the sweet potato that I like. But the calabaza is also really, really good. And it's obviously like more seasonal. So it just makes sense for this time of the year. But again, if any other questions come up, please feel free to reach out.